Are we live?
I think so. It
I
says
think
live.
we're live.
So. Oh, there
now
we go.
We're live. Okay. Tips. Hi, everybody.
We totally have this figured out. We
Totally,
know what we're
100%.
doing. We've only done this for a couple of months now. We're fine.
We decided for today, I'm like looking here instead of here.
Yeah.
Y'all, it's a day. Pastor Lydia and hi, I'm Pastor Amy.
I'm Pastor Lydia.
And we decided to just have some fun today and do Inside the Text together as a conversation. And the sad thing is that we have you set up on my computer, on a footstool, on a couch.
So we're making the best of what we have with us, but our conversations will be with you and with each other. And we might look at the screen or we might look at the camera. It's just how today's going to roll.
Yep. We're having fun. Pastor John's not here to boss us around. He's off.
Getting ready for Sarah's wedding.
Yes, bossing them around.
So wish all of them well in their festivities and for good weather on Saturday.
Lord, yes. And for just a beautiful and wonderful day. And for,
celebrating love.
Yeah. Yeah. Yay. So, okay, this week, first of all, okay, we're going to breathe.
Let's focus.
We're going to breathe. If you would like to set up your own space, now is the time to do it. I have not lit the candle, but you can. And I think we're just going to try this breathing exercise that I've been doing with Elijah, which is a deep breath in and a hum out, because that hum, the vocalization, is a thing that calms and steadies the central nervous system. So, let's breathe. Deep breath in.
Pastor Amy invited us to do this at our staff meeting yesterday, and I'm recovering from a cold, so it was really hard because I couldn't breathe through my nose. But today felt really good.
Yeah, and Nina coughed a little bit, and it's kind of weird doing that together.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
I mean, it reminds me of yoga classes, especially restorative yoga classes, where you breathe in and then people are like, and they just let it out. Which also feels really good. So I recommend that if that's what you need too.
Highly recommend. Lots of breathing exercises. Always.
Mm-hmm.
Spirit is breath. Breathe in, breathe out, be alive. So, today we are looking at Mark 6, 1 through 13. So I'm just going to read it, and then we'll talk.
Sounds good.
He, Jesus, left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph, and Judas and Simon, and are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went out among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. He said to them, "Wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you, As you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them." So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Yes. Yes. So, you and I both know Anna Carter Florence.
Oh my goodness, yes.
She's a preacher, a teacher, a writer.
And a prophet.
And a prophet. And she has this amazing book called A is for Alabaster that I've done a lot of reading from and learning from. But one thing that she teaches when she preaches is to follow the verbs, to look at the verbs. What is actively going on here in this text, right? So I was over at Cream and Amber in Hopkins, and I'm looking at the Interlinear Bible, which if none of you have ever looked at that, here's just a little clue into Bible study, whatever. Pastor Lydia and I and Pastor John, we are not like fluent in Greek or in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew. We do follow and read some heroes who are fluent in those languages and know them really well. But one of the tools that we were given in seminary is the Interlinear Bible, which is BibleHub.org, I believe. And you can just Google Interlinear and it will give you an entire text with all of the Greek words and the Strong's Concordance definition of those words. And it makes you feel and sound really smart. So
it also helps you with pronunciation, which can be really nice.
It really does. It really does. So I went there and I was looking at verbs, and here are a few that made me go, So, first of all, we were just looking at this as I was setting this up. One of them is in verse, where is it? In verse 3, at the end of verse 3. It says that the hearers in the synagogue took offense at Jesus. And before that, it says they were astounded, saying, "Where did this man get all this? This is like, how does he have this power? He's a carpenter."
Does the reading say power? Or does it say...
yes.
Okay.
It says, "What is this wisdom, Sophia, that has been given to him, and what deeds of power are being done by his hands?"
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know that this scene happens in multiple Gospels, and some translate it as authority. So
yeah.
I was curious.
Later in the text, when Jesus sends out the disciples...
He's been given the authority, right? Over the demons. Yeah.
He authorizes them. Right. To act with power. He says, like, that word... He gave a prolonged form. Like the verb there, gave, is the prolonged form of to give or to place upon for a long time. Authority, power to act, especially moral influence, and conferred power or delegation over demons.
Yeah. One of the reasons Greek is so complicated to translate is because there are 8 different tenses for verbs alone.
Yeah.
So that's why it's super complicated, which is kind of cluing in what we're talking about a little bit.
There's like, for verbs, we have in English, like, the present, past, future, and like,
and that's it.
Complete.
Yeah.
The completed. So maybe 4.
Which past and complete kind of get meshed sometimes.
Yeah.
Depending on the words and structure.
Yeah. Greek has those, but then it has like
4 more.
4 more, and one of them is like a perfect incomplete, which is like already but not yet. Right? Which we were talking about
where
yesterday.
we get that.
And it also has this prolonged verb. So like the tense being like, I place this upon you and it stays.
Yes. Versus like the incomplete being like when Jesus will say the kingdom of God is here. or is near, that is here and is also not complete yet.
It's an ongoing.
Yeah.
And then there's also the is that is and was complete ages ago.
Yeah. Like, this just is fact.
Right.
Because it happened.
God is, I am.
Yeah.
That kind of
It's
ongoing
confusing.
isness.
Which is what makes Greek, for one of many reasons, very challenging.
And super fun. And it's why we have all of these Bible study tools that we rely on.
And it's also why you get a lot of different translations and interpretations.
Yeah. And that's actually another thing that, this is fun. I was talking with Dominic last week on the mission trip. We are getting so off topic. I was talking with Dominic.
My bad.
It's okay. And he was just mentioning, like, he was like, hey, Pastor Amy, do you think that maybe in the Garden of Eden, we're going all the way back to Genesis.
Ooh, my
very
favorite.
beginning.
I'm an Old Testament nerd, so.
Hardcore same. He was like, do you think that maybe in the garden, when Adam ate the apple after Eve, that maybe he did it because he loved her so much that he didn't want her to be alone in the consequences of her actions? And first of all, I thought that was just so beautiful. What a generous reading of that, right? And also, like, it's really easy to be like, no. But then we don't know. We only know what happened, not why.
Yeah.
And so there's this beautiful practice in rabbinic studies and in Hebrew studies called midrash, which is just the practice of conversing and dialoguing and debating and filling in all those blanks with what could possibly be. And so I just loved that Dominic went there naturally, organically, like, this is what we do. And also, like, that's what we're always doing.
Yes, our Jewish siblings have a much better embracing of the mystery and the possibility of differences, and less it is this way and only this way. It is not black and white. It is always up for interpretation and changing and challenge. I mean, that's we literally see that in the stories of Jesus, because that's what the Pharisees and Sadducees and Jesus are all doing
constantly.
Like, that's why their back and forth is what it is.
Yeah.
We often picture it as just a constant battle for power and authority, which of course it was. And also,
who's right, who's wrong, who's right, who's wrong.
It was their culture to have these debates and arguments and challenges. Like, that was normal. So like, he was doing what was normal, and so were they. So we always have to remember that, so that we try really hard not to always paint the Pharisees and the Sadducees and religious leaders, or even people from his hometown in this story, as the villain of the story, because they're not.
Yeah. There are no villains. This is just how they lived, and Jesus was
and it's how they still live.
Right. Jesus was a rabbi.
Yeah.
This is what
he did.
This is what they do.
That's what they're supposed to do.
It's
what their culture did then, and it still does today.
Yeah, that's what the synagogue, like, that's what going to synagogue is about, is wrestling. The name Israel
means wrestle.
To wrestle. Jacob wrestled with the angel of the Lord all night long, broke his hip, whatever. And he wrestled God for God's blessing, and then God changed Jacob's name
from Jacob
to Israel. Right? It was Jacob.
Yep.
Yeah. From Jacob to Israel.
Fun fact, Jacob means he who cheats.
Ayo! I prefer he who wrestles. Right? Like, I would much prefer that name. So this is really fascinating, because we are already getting into this. Yay! So they're in synagogue. This is what they do, right? They wrestle, they argue back and forth. And so in this text where it says that many who heard Jesus teaching were astounded. And astounded here, I looked this up. So when it says, first of all, when they heard him, many heard him, it means that they were actually listening and comprehending what he was saying. And they were astonished, which means to strike with panic or shock. Yeah. Like, he is saying some really radical things. We don't even know what. We don't know
Yeah,
what.
It doesn't say. We can assume, but we have no clue.
That's the midrash of it. We're filling in some blanks. We're going, we know where he's just been. In fact, in chapter 4 and 5, prior to this, he's just been like teaching all these parables. In chapter 5, he heals the Gerasene demoniac, whose demons were legion, right? And then he restores a girl to life. He raises a girl from the dead. Who
and then he goes home and is like, hey guys!
And then he goes back to his home synagogue. And no doubt everybody has heard about all of this, right?
And they're like, I mean, who has the power, aside from God, to raise the dead?
Right.
It is a genuine, legitimate question to ask.
Uh-huh. And they're going, how is it Jesus?
His sisters are right next to us.
His sisters
are
here.
His dad is a carpenter down the street who made our, like, door frame.
Right. And also they're, like, probably going, this is the Jesus who, when he was, like, 12 or 13 years old, stayed back at the synagogue at the temple, and his mom and dad were freaking out like they lost him.
Yeah.
And they go and they find him in the synagogue, and he's like, I'm in my father's house. What do you expect? So I think he was probably a little bit of a snobby brat. And these people in the synagogue who know him,
they're remembering angsty teenage Jesus.
Right. They broke up some fights. They saw him being a brother.
They also saw him as a toddler, like, learning how to walk.
Right. Right.
So, like...
like, I was talking about this today at Chapel View, and I think I mentioned it yesterday when I was at the Glen, doing our monthly worship there, that after I had Eli, right, I'm 29 years old, I've just given birth, I almost died doing it, and my oldest sister tells me later that was the moment she realized I was not a little girl anymore. I was a woman, I was a mother who was capable of dying for her child to have life. And it was that moment where she went, this isn't my annoying little sister anymore. She's a whole other person.
And that's what's happening here.
Right. They're going, who is this person?
This isn't
and also,
the Jesus
like,
we know.
Yeah. And also, like, who do you think you are? Whatever he was saying was astounding.
Scary.
Shocking.
Scary.
Right. Scary, shocking, whatever. And they're going, who do you think you are to speak like this, to teach like this? Where does this power and authority come from? Right? And they are offended, and this word here is what we were just talking about. To offend does not mean to, like, upset or, like...
It's not like politically correct or clutch your pearls kind of things like we think about it today.
It actually means, it's the Greek word is scandalizo, which is to ensnare or cause to stumble, which, like, literally, he tripped them up.
Yeah.
They're stumbling over this, going, wait, what?
So most likely he's said something that not only is, like, super radical in a, like, well, they've never heard this before, but it's also challenging their understanding of God and their culture and their relationship with each other and the Roman Empire and everything. Yeah. So it's massively different than anything they've ever heard before.
And deeply disruptive.
Especially from a rabbi.
Mm-hmm. And especially in their, like, this kid that they know, and, like, I think there's probably some, I would imagine, like, some concern, like, you got to be careful, man. Do you know what you're doing?
Yeah.
Do you hear yourself?
And, like, concern for themselves, too, because if, like, those
guilt by association.
Those in authority here, we all know that the only way that empires maintain their power is not by singling out the one person, but
collective punishment.
The whole thing.
Yeah. And
it's why Israel is under imperial power, is because all of them have to be under it.
Yep. And there are leaders among them who have, we've discussed this before, some of the religious leaders have allied with political powers, not necessarily to gain more power for themselves, but to actually, like, keep a very tenuous peace. Yes. That keeps them, like, the Roman Empire is brutal, and they know this. Brutal.
They crucify regularly.
Hundreds of people, all the time. Streets lined with crosses. It was not
It's brutal torture.
Brutal torture. And
that was execution.
Right. And reserved for enemies of the state. Right?
Which a lot of people were considered.
Everybody is considered that who doesn't uphold Pax Romana, the Roman peace, right? So the religious leaders are allied with them going, this is how we can maintain both our tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is how we keep the temple and keep synagogue teaching and Hebrew life happening while also staying alive and not disrupting that peace. And Jesus is very much disrupting that peace. And his cousin, John the Baptist, is also disrupting that peace in major, major ways. And so there's this guilt by association feature that's like,
literally here they are on a silver platter kind of situation.
Right. Literally what happens right after this in the Gospel of Mark.
John's head.
John the Baptist is beheaded by Herod, who, interestingly, in verse, I was reading this too, going, what's the context of everything happening here? Which is really
so important.
It's important, but with Mark, it's like totally unreliable because nothing is chronological.
No.
Or if it is,
Accurate.
It's like skipping months at a time.
Yeah.
So,
Mark is kind of like a SparkNotes version of the Gospels as well as an action movie. I like to say it reads like an action movie would portray the Gospels.
Yeah.
It's just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
There's never a break. There's explosion after explosion. It's like a James Cameron film.
There it is. Yeah. And so there may have been a lot that happened between each vignette, but still, like, he's telling the whole big story and showing why it was so catastrophic.
Yeah.
Right? So Jesus, after this, he says, no prophet is welcome in his own hometown, which is true. We look at this week's Ezekiel text, and Ezekiel is sent out to be a prophet, and God tells him, speak, and whether or not they hear you, they will know that a prophet is among them. So that's what we're dealing with a prophet, right? Mm-hmm. Is somebody who's radical, who's speaking things that nobody wants to hear because they're disruptive, they are discomforting, they're discombobulating, they make you trip, they make you go, wait a second. And later, he sends out the disciples, right?
Yeah. 2
by 2 with nothing, totally dependent on whoever they come to for food, clothing, shelter.
For everything.
Everything.
Which was also common in that culture. People practice hospitality way differently than we do today. So people would have naturally welcomed them in to their communities and their homes.
That was a normal practice.
That's just normal. So it sounds really radical to us because who of us would just walk out our front door without anything and hope that our next door neighbors would shelter us?
And how many of us are going to answer the door to a perfect stranger with nothing on their backs but the shoes on their feet and one tunic?
I mean, how many of us just drive by this perfect strangers that stand on the corner asking for things?
And we judge them. We do not receive them. We do not welcome them. We do not help them.
It's a totally different culture and community. It's much more communal care than what we live in today. So,
let that be a lesson.
It sounds radical to us, but to them it wasn't all that radical.
Right. It was just how they did life. And we could
learn from them.
Definitely learn from them. But yeah, Jesus sends them out, and it says they went and they proclaimed, they preached that all should repent. And repent here, this is amazing. I love this verb. It does not mean like,
forgive me for I am a sinner and I'm a horrible human being and less than
means,
like poo.
It means metanousin, which means to think differently, to reconsider, which is all that midrash is, like reconsider. Have you considered this possibility? But have you considered that possibility? But that doesn't make sense with all of this.
Yeah.
Right?
How is this? There's a disconnect here with how we're practicing versus how our ancestors practiced versus what this actually says and is written down versus what the prophets prophesied to us. And like, there's
so much sense to make of so many things, and there are so many blanks to fill in. And the beauty is that we get to, and we are called to, and by like ancestry, through what the great cloud of witnesses gave us when they were on this earth, and what the saints have given us, and what the Spirit gives us, is this invitation to do the very same.
Yeah.
So, like, side note, not really a side note, point of reference, whenever we're preaching, at least this goes for me, maybe not for you. Everything I preach, I fully believe in on the day that I'm preaching.
Yep.
And it is all up for interpretation. I don't know anything.
And it's subject to change the next hour or day.
Yeah. Like, I've read this text so many times, and in studying this, I've been like, I want to talk about shaking off the dust. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And I'm looking at it, and I'm going, ew, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Right?
I don't want to go there.
I often start out, and I'm like, oh, this is where I'm going to go. And then I sit down and start working, and I'm like, okay, fine, Holy Spirit. You're going to take me in a, 180-degree different direction. It's fine.
And it's fine. But before, there have been times in the past where I have, totally lingered on this, and that's what I would have preached. So, with all hope and grace and mercy of God and the Spirit, in 5 or 10 years, I will look back and hear myself and be like, oh, I was way off. Because we're always evolving. We are wrestling. If we're faithful to God and faithful to our call as pastors, but also as disciples who are sent out. As people, as community, as people who care mutually for one another, which, put a pin in that because I'm going to come back to it in a second. As people who care for one another, the best we can hope for is constant growth and evolution.
Yeah, together and individually.
Right. So the pin is another interesting verb that Jesus is healing and the disciples go and heal and cure. That verb means to attend, to care for, to
it's very active.
It's very active, and sometimes it involves the supernatural, but it also means to heal someone is just to be with them.
Yeah, to be present or to let them touch you.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of, especially in the Gospel of Mark, in Jesus's ministry, there's a lot of physical touch.
Yes.
More so than in any of the other Gospels.
Embodied,
And
incarnational.
I think a lot of it is because in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is interacting with people who have literally not had human physical touch because of societal structure and rules and purity laws. Mm-hmm. And it's a way of showing how crucial and vital it is as human beings to actually have physical contact. And for some people, that's a lot because that's just what they need. And for some people, it's a very small amount, but we all need physical touch.
Right. The gospel is incarnational. The good news.
There's a reason.
It happens in the body, and it happens in Jesus's flesh and blood. When Jesus gave us communion at the Last Supper, he said, this is my body broken for you. This is my blood poured out for you, right?
It doesn't get more human than that. I mean, it doesn't get more human than a very messy human childbirth, which Jesus experienced.
Blood and placenta, kiddos. You're not kiddos. That's just a phrase I say. Yeah, I love this because we get in our heads. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm going off camera. Sorry about that. Leaning the wrong way. We get in our heads and we think, look at me, I'm studying the verbs and the nouns and what does this mean? Whatever. And that's all very academic, but if the academic doesn't lead you into an incarnational way of being, if what I learn and know doesn't change how I move in my body and how I move around other bodies, right? That's a really big thing is, who am I allowing in my presence? Who am I spending energy on? Mm-hmm. Physical energy. Energy is an actual physical thing. It's not just this esoteric idea that we're oh, they have bad energy, bad vibes. It's actually everything on this planet has
air,
a vibration.
The molecules of this air is vibrating around us. Yes. And when we hear thunder, it's because they're moving so quickly that they crash into one another. That's what that is. Because it's so hot.
So when we say that everything is energy and that we're sharing and we're keeping energy, Jesus says, shake the dust off. I think that's a protect your energy, protect your peace.
And I also think
don't misuse it or let other people abuse it.
Also, to your point, the people in his hometown synagogue aren't open to this shifting and changing and possibility of newness. They're a little more closed off to it.
which is to their detriment. Like, this is one thing when
because
it says
he doesn't heal them.
Right.
There's
they
so
don't
many people.
get healed.
He, like, healed a few bumps and bruises is what it basically
Yeah.
kind of comes down to.
Or he sat with a few infirm people and nourished their souls. But
he didn't perform any big miracles. He didn't raise anyone from the dead in his hometown.
Right. And it says actually in Mark, Matthew and Luke change the verb to does not, like Jesus does not heal anyone. In Mark, it is Jesus could not.
Yeah.
Like he was disempowered by the people. And this is important too in talking about community. Like when we as a community are closed off, we hinder other people's healing. Like how many people in that synagogue needed and could have experienced profound healing and wholeness if they had not collectively rejected him. And this is another thing, is it says that Jesus was amazed by their unbelief. And this verb amazed is like dumbfounded. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Right? It's
just literally like struck dumb.
Like, how do you not get this? How can you possibly reject this?
Yeah.
Right? Which isn't okay. For example, I am dumbfounded by people who really need hell and eternal hell to be a physical, actual reality because they need other people to go to hell for heaven to be special for them or whatever. And I am struck dumb by the idea that anyone would want anyone else to suffer eternally. Like it doesn't compute. And I think that's what's happening here. For Jesus, it doesn't compute. What he's offering is from God. It's not a conjuring of magic. It's healing and liberation for people who are living under occupation. And have been living under violent occupation in one form or another for centuries. At this point, it's been centuries. And this particular occupation, this particular empire is the most violent.
It is brutal.
And the creativity with which the Roman Empire metes out justice
and maintains its
power and its peace are like unbelievable, right? We know this from the centuries after and the persecution and martyrdom of so many Christians.
Well, and we just know it from their brutality of conquering all the way up into England.
All of it.
Like, you only do that through sheer brutality.
Yeah.
And war.
And terror.
Yeah.
Terror. So, yeah. Jesus comes offering liberation and a message of a whole different kind of anti-empire kingdom that actually is so threatening to the empire that they killed John and they killed Jesus and they kill all of the disciples when it comes down to it. Like, that's how threatening this radical message is.
Hundreds of martyrs.
Thousands.
Because they were threatened. The Christianity was outlawed.
Yeah.
Like, that's how radical, but how powerful it also is. And, like, the people in power know how powerful it is.
And it's all about community.
And care.
Mutual community and care, and, like, we take care of us, right? That's what Jesus is offering, is, like, we take care of us. And the unbelief, I'm going to touch on this real quick. When it says that Jesus was amazed, dumbfounded by their unbelief, this unbelief is disloyalty. It's unfaithfulness. Like, he's dumbfounded that they would not trust him. Like, they know him. They know where he comes from. On one hand, they're like using his parentage, the virgin birth, weaponizing it against him. And yet he's going, you know that this was a miracle, that this was I am the work of the Spirit of God upon my mother.
You know this.
You know this. You know who I am. You know what I've always been about. How can you reject this?
And I think also a little bit of that is back to, like, that academic tradition of midrash, of just the unbelief that they're unwilling to even practice what is normal for their culture.
Yeah.
open conversation
Right.
about change and possibility and how God shifts and changes, even in the midst of them. Maybe it was that way, but it's no longer that way. And I think something that also is really important to remember when we're having these conversations is Jesus didn't set out to start a new religion.
No.
Just like
he
a
was
couple
fully,
of weeks ago.
He was fully a rabbi, a Jew.
Fully Jewish.
To his core.
Like, did not set out to start a new religion.
No.
Just like a couple weeks ago in the Inside the Text that I did about Paul, I reminded everybody Paul was not trying to start Christianity. He was trying to reform Judaism.
Yep. Kind of how like Martin Luther was a Catholic
and was
to his death.
Trying to reform Catholicism, not start a new branch of Christianity. Yeah. And so like it's always really important to remember that when we're having these conversations about culture, about religion, and about Christ and Jesus and what he's saying and unbelief and unfaithfulness to who he is, because he's talking about his God as a Jewish God.
Yeah.
Like how our Jewish siblings understand God. That's how Jesus was talking about God.
Yep.
And that's really important to remember so that we are open to understanding that Christianity is not what Jesus is saying he's astounded by in their unbelief.
Yeah.
I know a lot of Christianity will take that and it'll go, we are right and everybody else is wrong.
And it'll become a very anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic kind of practice, which, side note, Reverend Dr. Wilda Gaffney, in her women's lectionary for the whole church, Year B, which I've been reading, she does some really quick but insightful digging into how easily the reading of these texts, and in particular the reading of John, can lead us into anti-Semitism.
Luke and John are really
in our thinking and in our patterns. Like
easy to slip
Jesus was a Jew. Jesus
was not reforming
was a rabbi.
He was not trying to start a new religion.
He was opening and expanding and flipping on its head. You have heard it said, but I tell you, what they already knew, right? He is offering new perspective. And apparently in this particular instance,
it was real scary.
It was scary, which I think is also instructive to us. Like when we're talking about scary things or when we're saying big words in our sermons, like I don't know how I can preach without acknowledging ongoing genocides that are being committed by Western empires that are brutal, and they land most forcefully and deadly on Black and brown bodies. And I can't faithfully preach the word of God without acknowledging that and saying that outright. And sometimes that's scary, and sometimes the call of the gospel is, I think always it should be disruptive.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
because it wants to shake us. It wants to trip us up. Jesus wants to trip us up. And
it's like constantly using a muscle that is uncomfortable. You're not quite like pulling it and injuring yourself,
but it's burning.
You're stretching and burning constantly.
Yeah. And that is how when you're exercising, that's how you build muscle.
Yeah.
Right? Is through the burn. And Jesus is constantly wanting us to flex those muscles of expansion and widening our imaginations to a more liberated and mutual kingdom of God, which is the way of God happening here.
Here, right now.
Right now.
It's the already and not yet.
What we are building and becoming.
Yeah. And if we're not open and expanding,
we're stuck.
Well, and we've put God in a box, and we're human. We can't do that. We don't have the authority or the power to even begin to fully comprehend God as the author of all things. Like, what? I'm sorry. Right. I'm actually kind of glad I don't understand, because I feel like, woo, I'd be back to like Stardust at that point.
Seriously. Right? So it's just so important that we keep our minds and our bodies open to things and open to new ideas and open to disruptive and uncomfortable ideas. A lesson that is constantly taught by Black teachers in anti-racism work is like, white-bodied people got to get real good at discomfort, because we have been
Yeah.
so used to being comfortable and having a gospel that is good news for us and always has been, and has always, conversely, been bad news for them.
Yeah.
Right? And so unraveling that in myself and in my practices should be deeply uncomfortable all the time. And the muscle work is getting comfortable with discomfort.
It's just being okay being uncomfortable.
Like we're made to grow. It's growing pains all the time. And this is a beautiful invitation for us to constantly be doing that.
And the discomfort is more comforting when you're doing it together.
Yes. Yes, we're
when
doing
you're
it
alone,
as a team.
you don't want to keep doing it because it's exhausting and isolating and disheartening.
Which is why Jesus sent them out 2 by 2.
Yes. And also draws everyone together.
Yeah.
It's all about doing all of this type of work, not just communal care, but also disruption together, so that we aren't alone and isolated and exhausted and disheartened all the time.
And so we can breathe like a choir that's singing one long note.
Yes.
Where if 40 people are singing and holding that note to the end of their breath, each person can take a breath in the middle of that without breaking the note, because we're all doing this together. So we have kept you for way more than 15 minutes. We're on 41.
But a conversation.
But I love this.
Yeah, the conversation. Maybe this is what we should explore more.
I think so. I dig it.
Instead of just like us talking at the camera. I think we should try that.
I enjoyed this.
Me too.
Sorry, John. Or maybe next time, Pastor John, if you're watching this.
Well, remember he pre-recorded his for next week.
He did, by the way. Of note, there will be no Facebook Live Inside the Text next week. It'll just be a pre-recorded thing. Yeah. Which will also be awesome.
But maybe the following week we'll do one.
Yeah.
Another conversation.
Because it's fun.
It is.
And also, like, this is helping me write my sermon. So leave your notes, leave your comments, leave your midrash.
And come talk to us on Sunday about what has risen and surfaced for you that is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Let us know what is discomforting.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to make us uncomfortable either, because we are part of this community as well.
And it's a practice we have to continually enter into as well.
So pick and prod, trip me up. Especially
ask the questions.
Yeah. Do it before Sunday too, because I would love to be flowing with this sermon as I'm writing it. Yeah. That's good stuff. So peace to you all. God's peace be with you. And blessings upon you this week from both of us. And keep Pastor John and the family in your prayers for just a beautiful, wonderful wedding. And if you're out and about tonight, enjoy the weather.
And don't forget, take some deep breaths.
Deep breaths. Always breathing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. How do I end this? We're going to end it. It's going to be weird. It's awkward.